Good evening, everyone. I see our participant numbers are rising steadily. You know, this is my favorite part, watching you guys pour in for what we have to offer you this evening. I'm not going to tell you what my expectation is, because I don't want to ruin it. But for the almost 300 of you who are in the room, so to speak, it is great to see you. I'm going to give it another minute or so folks can wander in depending on your time zone. This might be your happy hour. Make sure you have your beverage at hand. For me, it's water, and we're going to talk about my water intake at some point with our guests. We have passed the 300 mark. I am loving this. I'm loving this. I will go ahead and start this intro very softly. And so I will say hello and welcome one and all to Skeptical Inquirer Presents. Welcome back to our returning audience members. A happy hello to our new folks, and a special double thumbs up to those of you who are watching on the recording. Thank you for making time for us. It is September, and I wish all of you a happy cat month. It is a particular joy for those of us who are owned and operated by a cat. We are a special group of people. It is also very fitting that September is also self-improvement month, because our goal with this series is for you to be informed and then hopefully indeed improved. And today, which is Stardate, Thursday, September 10th, is also Swap Ideas Day. So what better place to be than right here, right now? And we are inching to the almost 400 mark of participants. So thank you for being here, everyone. And if you've been here before, you know that Skeptical Inquirer Presents is a live online presentation from experts who are devoted to advancing science over pseudoscience, media literacy over conspiracy theories, and of course, critical thinking over magical thinking. As you know, my name is Leighann. I am a stand-up comedian, author, and co-host for Point of Inquiry, the podcast for the Center of Inquiry. And you can listen to POI wherever you get your podcasts. If you haven't already, I encourage you to get a subscription to Skeptical Inquirer magazine. I think that will be a wonderful companion to the series that we have been doing. And be sure to check out CFI's Coronavirus Resource Center so that you are on top of the information, because it seems to change quite frequently. And you can find that at centerforinquiry.org/coronavirus. And if you are so inclined, you guys, you can find out more about me and my work at veryfunnylady.com. And just so you know, the flow of tonight's Skeptical Inquirer Presents is not so much a presentation as it is a conversation. And I get to have that with our guest about viral BS. This is the title of her book, Viral BS, Medical Myths and Why We Fall for Them. We don't have enough time to cover them all, but we will do as many as we can. For me, this is just a fantastic opportunity, and I'm going to ask as many questions as I can. But of course, I'm going to leave time for you to ask questions pertaining to the topic that I may have missed. And so if you are new here, I will point you to some of you are already there in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom and slight right. If you are watching on your laptop, that's the place for you to type your questions in the form of a question as opposed to a statement. And we will try to get to as many of them as possible within the hour. And so our guest this evening, so impressive, is an Emmy Award-winning journalist, a poet, a medical doctor, and an author. She served as an officer in the Epidemic Intelligence Service at the CDC, where she investigated disease outbreaks. I feel like that should be a movie where she could star as herself. I would watch that. She trained in journalism at the University of Toronto and in medicine at the University of Cambridge. She was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Breaking News in 2017 with a team from the Dallas Morning News, and a recipient of an Emmy for reporting on neglected diseases. She teaches science journalism and is the director of the Stanford Health Communication Initiative. I hope you saw her August 28th New York Times article with Craig Spencer, because I love the title, which is, "But I saw it on Facebook." why hoaxes are making doctors' jobs a lot harder. If I can only tell you the number of friends I have who go to Facebook, like, but Facebook, no, that's not a go-to. She has written several books, including The Impatient Dr. Leighann. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Muslim Women Are Everything. I don't know who didn't know that. Subtitled Stereotype Shattering Stories of Courage, Inspiration, and Adventure. And her upcoming book and the topic of our conversation this evening, once again, is Viral BS, Medical Myths and Why We Fall for Them. And with that, I welcome our guest, Dr. Seema Yasmin.
Hi, Leighann. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for such a kind introduction.
Oh, hun, I could go on and on and on. Your resume and your passion and your work are just incredibly impressive to me. Now, I mentioned your book. Can you tell us when it will be out?
Yeah, so I've been working on this book for 4 years, and it's not so much about COVID. It just happens to be coming out at a time when we are living through this historic pandemic. So it's like one of those weird, oh my goodness, look at the timing. The book is out January 12th, but you can pre-order now and you may end up getting it a bit early.
Fantastic, fantastic. So you guys heard that. It's coming out soon. You can pre-order it. Head on over to Amazon. Amazon, yes, is that correct?
Yeah, it's available on so many places where you would
Okay.
order books. I keep thinking, oh, January's so far away. And then
It's
I'm like,
not.
no.
Not. I mean, seeing how fast the year is going, we're already all late for our Christmas shopping, if Christmas
Yeah,
shopping is your thing.
yeah.
Um, I'm very lucky because I feel like I got a chance to read, sections of your book. And I have to ask you, was there something in the research for your book that surprised you? Like maybe you thought was a myth, but it's not, or, vice versa? Or,
Yeah, so the subtitle of the book is Medical Myths and Why We Fall for Them, right? And so with each chapter, each of the chapters is pretty slim. You saw because you got a sneak preview of the book, but each chapter kind of answers a question. And so the chapter titles are these questions, and they're the questions that I get asked all the time. Things
right.
like, do vaccines cause autism? Can you cure autism? Are chemtrails in the air from airplanes, are they toxic? Like very, very broad, right? About supplements and dieting and all sorts of things. But then there are these chapters which are not so much about myths, but about kind of really dark chapters in medical history. But the reason I
Hmm.
bring those up, it's kind of like me washing our medical dirty laundry in public, is because those terrible dark chapters are some of the reasons why many people now are still scared about getting a vaccine. It's why many people now, for different reasons, do not trust scientists or the scientific process. So one of the things that really did shock me was this chapter that's about aspirin's connection with Nazi Germany. And as I was researching this and I got asked this question, I was thinking, wait, what? Like, that doesn't sound, I've never heard this. And like you kind of think you know things sometimes and you're like, no, surely by the grand age of 38, I would have heard if this was true, right? Aspirin, like we all pop aspirin all the time. There are some people that take it every single day, a mini dose to protect their heart. And it turns out that aspirin does have this connection to Nazi Germany and to concentration camps. And so there are people living today, because we still, have survivors of the Holocaust alive today, barely. They're the last, we'll be able to have conversations with, but there are still some of them that refuse to take aspirin because of those connections. And I won't get into all the details. You can read that
Okay.
chapter to really like learn more. But I was like, whoa. So imagine you're having a conversation with some of your patients and you're not thinking, oh, they're not going to take aspirin. You're like, you need to take a baby dose of aspirin to protect your heart, protect your blood vessels, protect you from stroke, things like that. But there are reasons why somebody might be like, no, no. And
Yes.
we don't always know that, or we don't always listen to our patients very much to kind of understand why they believe what they believe, why they may or may not follow medical guidance. And that's what the book is really asking, like, why do we believe the weird things that we believe? And why do we sometimes do very strange, irrational things?
Mm. Again, we don't have enough time.
I know, I
I
know.
yeah, I'm gonna ask a couple of questions here, and be honest, but take it easy on me, but still be honest. I will tell you that I drank 7.5 glasses of water today, and I'm feeling like a failure because I didn't make it all the
Oh,
way to 8. Because we're supposed to drink exactly 8 glasses of water a day,
oh,
are we not?
yeah, right. That's the question. You know, the science on this is so varied, Leighann, and I was looking at these different studies done by different groups. There's not like this one specific measurement for every single person because one, we are all different. We have different metabolisms, we have different body masses, but also on a given day, you might do a workout one day and not do a workout the other. You might be hiking in hot weather one day and not the other, right? So your own needs are different. The 8 glasses a day thing is pretty easy to remember. It's not a bad guide, and that's why that has stuck. But if you were to look at the National Academy of Sciences and Medicine, some of the NIH recommendations, they specifically say 2.7 liters a day for women and 3.7 liters a day for men. Now, there's even variation in that though, right? Because not every guy looks the same, not all of us, not all women look the same. And for example, myself right now, I'm really trying to be deliberate about increasing my fiber content in my diet because, having a healthy gut is so important. I need to drink more water than I have. So I'm aiming for around like 3 to 3.5 liters. But that's also me trying it out slowly. I don't want to get water toxicity, which is a real thing, and drink too much. So I think 8 glasses a day is a good guide, but then you have to use common sense based on what you're doing that day, how you feel. If you feel dehydrated, drink more, obviously. But the science on this, and honestly, the science on so much nutritional stuff is not great. It's getting better. We're learning more. But there's no like hard and fast rule about water intake.
Okay, so a guide as opposed to a hard and fast rule.
Yeah.
And we do mean water and not bourbon intake, just for my fellow bourbonites
This is not no. Yeah.
who might be listening. And wow, we are up to 505 folks. Thank you for joining us. If you joined us late, by the way, and someone always asks this question, anything you missed, this is being recorded, and you guys will be able to see this tomorrow. Anything you've missed on skepticalinquirer.org. I also ask you this because I get so confused about artificial sweeteners
Oh yeah.
that you know what, I just kind of went back to regular sugar because I
Yeah.
figure
It's not a
it's
bad
natural
idea.
and natural is best. I don't know. I'm probably wrong.
No, that's not a bad idea because I also like the taste of things like honey, maple syrup. Sometimes in baking, you just need regular sugar for the chemistry of it to work. And so my thing is just have less of it. If you're used to putting 2 big spoons of sugar in your coffee and you're trying to switch to an artificial sweetener and it does not taste good, then use regular sugar, but a lot less of it. Have it in moderation. Now you're getting at some of the science around the artificial sweeteners. They've gotten a bad name. Generally they are safe and that's why they are available, right?
Okay.
Um, but it really depends on that balance between maybe a person who's diabetic or pre-diabetic really needs to prevent those spikes in blood sugar versus someone who's not diabetic, but they need to cut down. And it also comes down to taste as well. Some people really like retch with some of the artificial sweeteners. But even with those, even with those, I would say you can train your palate to tolerate less sweetness. Because sometimes what I've
Yeah.
seen patients do is they're like, oh, I'm not going to put 2 tablespoons of honey in my tea. Sorry, sugar in my tea, but I'm going to put like a quarter cup of honey. And I'm like, no, but honey, I know it is natural, it's tasty, but it's still going to spike your blood sugar, essentially. So it's just about moderation.
Wow. So much of this, it requires one being responsible, a responsible adult.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, sorry, there's no way out of
unfortunately.
that.
Yeah, no, I need supervision for sure. Now, I will say this one was a big one among my friends. I'm sure you recall, I don't know where you were in the 90s, if you were here in the States or at home, but
I was in the
back,
UK.
okay, well, back in the 90s, colonics were pretty big.
Oh boy.
Yeah, yeah. I can neither confirm nor deny that I got talked into it. I'm just going to say it was a bad date.
Oh,
Now,
I want to hear that story.
now it seems like the trend is, detox teas and
Oh.
cleanses. Yeah, yeah. And my friends talk about this stuff all the time. And so, do we really need to do external things to flush toxins from our bodies?
So there's a chapter on this in the book.
Yes.
There's also a chapter on artificial sweetener, so you can get into more detail because I think the title of that chapter is about do diet sodas cause Alzheimer's? Because that was like big in the headlines a while ago. So there's that chapter that kind of dissects all of that evidence. When it comes to these cleanses, they are big money for some companies. right? Because we all want to look slimmer because of diet culture and thin culture. We've been led to believe that our bodies can't detox on their own, and so we have to take things to detox. There's a very funny story. I think it's the first chapter of the book about
It is
using
the first chapter, yes.
charcoal. It's ridiculous. I do not recommend what I'm doing. Learn from my mistake. But anyway, in a nutshell, your body, if you're eating well, you're drinking well, you're doing exercise, your body's constantly flushing out toxins and eliminating waste. You pee, you poop, you sweat, and you exhale, and all of that is getting rid of the stuff that you don't need. So these charcoal cleanses, these flat tummy teas, not only are they a scam because they're just like collecting your coins and not really giving you anything except maybe a bit of a placebo effect. But in the case of the flat tummy teas, and I really get into this in the book, those can send people to the hospital sometimes because a lot of them are laxatives, which you shouldn't be taking for a long period of time, which folks do if they're drinking the tea every day. And they can cause severe dehydration through the laxative effect and cause kidney failure for some people as well. So I always joke that, on Instagram, you see people kind of like posing sideways, holding in their belly and like, take this tea, but you never see the images of them on the toilet cramping and having diarrhea or in the hospital hooked up to an IV because they're so dehydrated from these teas. And actually, that chapter gets into the details, not just of the science of the scam, but also like behind the scenes of the business of this and how it is that they kind of exploit our needs to feel healthy and our needs to get slim, that those things are pretty much scams. And now you even get, I had a pizza a while ago, about a year ago in DC, at this place where not only was it like a cauliflower crust, but they had put charcoal in the crust. So it looked cool. I ate it. It was yummy. But I'm like, I'm eating pizza. This is not detoxing me. This just tastes good in my belly. The time when charcoal will work is if you land in the ER or your kid lands in the ER because you've taken in something that's toxic. And the ER doctors are like, we need to give you a bucket load of activated charcoal to try and absorb that. That's different to when you get these charcoal pills in CVS or wherever that
Okay.
aren't really doing anything.
So that we really should file that under don't try this at home.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
a
if you go to a place that's so bougie that they put charcoal in the pizza crust, I recommend it because you feel very cool eating like a gray pizza. It was like a black pizza, but
Oh
it's
my
not
gosh.
detoxing you. Like your liver is detoxing you, your kidneys are
Okay.
detoxing you. So if you look after those with good hydration and diet, and in fact, one of the stories that's in the book in that chapter is about this poor woman who died from liver
Yeah.
failure because of drinking these detox teas. Because the thing that, sometimes we dismiss herbal stuff. I think we dismiss it in a way that makes the public think, oh, it doesn't work. But it's not that. Actually, these herbs are really powerful. And they're so powerful that they can do liver damage if you're taking too much. Or in her case, she was having a lot of detox tea and then also having a couple glasses of red wine with dinner in the evening. And all of that interacting, she was a young woman. She died of liver failure. And the doctors published the case report and they were like, look at all these herbs that were in this tea. Some of these are toxic to the liver, and we think this is what caused her liver to basically become really black and dead, and then she died.
Very sad. Very sad. You hear herbs and natural, and you just think, oh, it's fine for you. I think this is one of those things where we're susceptible because it sounds like we're doing something good.
Yeah,
It
right.
sounds like we're helping the body along, and we're not. And so, you guys, listen, if you want to flush out the toxins, get off Tinder, take a shower.
Oh, Tinder.
So, so much
Are we
easier.
are we going to give dating advice now too?
Well, I'll mix it in, and if anybody has any dating advice for me, I'll certainly take it. One of your chapters, I read with well, I read them all with interest, but I grew up in an urban area in the hood, and I remember all of the local Chinese restaurants at the time had up these handmade signs that said no MSG.
Yeah.
Okay, and for everybody in the audience, MSG, we mean monosodium glutamate. We are not talking about Master Sergeant, Maine State Government, or the Master of Science in Geography. None of that. None of that. We are talking about MSG, and you see these signs. I grew up with that, and you would assume the natural conclusion is that MSG is bad for you. And one of the chapters in your book is MSG addictive? Like I didn't even think,
Yeah.
oh, is MSG, yeah, is it addictive? I was like, I
Yeah.
didn't even think about that, but that was a great chapter.
You make a really good point though about the when you ban or when you're making it sound like we banned something. So those signs on the restaurant windows that say no MSG, automatically makes you think, well, MSG must be bad. And actually,
Yeah.
I'll answer your question and talk about that chapter, but it just made me think this is what happened about 20 years ago when the CDC and the FDA said thimerosal is a safe additive for vaccines, but we're removing it. And so people are like, well, if it was safe, why are you? And it completely caused a backfire effect.
Yes.
And that's why you have to be really careful in how you communicate things, right? And even sometimes when I teach classes on communication, I teach that paragraph where the CDC and FDA kind of had this paragraph of guidance about thimerosal. It's so confusing. By the end of it, you're like, so is it safe? Oh, it is safe, but you removed it. Now the vaccines are safe. Like, I don't get it. So yeah, that just reminded me of that whole how confusing it can be.
Hmm.
But it turns out MSG, which my family, we still put in our food. And suddenly I was like, wait, should we not be doing that? It's fine. It's safe. And there's the kind I kind of outlined the history of MSG and the way it was initially linked with, oh, it's causing this terrible reaction in people's bodies. It even got published and written up as these case reports in the New England Journal of Medicine. It was like very legit. And then it was like, actually, no, it's not the MSG. And this is actually xenophobia. Like we're connecting the use of MSG with Asian food, even though many people use it, to create this kind of syndrome that wasn't really real.
Thank you. No, and you guys, once again, if you get the book, that is a wonderful chapter, especially if you grew up in that era. And I remember those signs. I'm like, well, this must be serious. Somebody did a
Yeah,
handwritten
yeah.
sign.
Otherwise, why would they? Why would they cut it out otherwise? As with the thimerosal, it makes it really confusing.
I have a couple of medical myths from the mom files. That's what I call them because
Okay.
I believe them because my mom said so. When your mom is a source of information, you're sort of hesitant to examine it.
Mhm.
And the first one is going outside in the cold makes you sick, right?
Right? Does it? Well, there's some common sense in this. Going outside
Of
in the
course.
cold and not covering up well does kind of make you feel crappy. And actually, it may not be great for your immune system. But there's something else happening, right? Because when we think about going out in the cold, it's also at that time of year where actually we may be staying indoors a lot more. And we may be having a more stuffy environment because we're not cracking open the windows, opening patio doors. And so that's also why we may see there's more respiratory illnesses in the winter times and the cold times because we're like more packed together, more indoors, not getting as much fresh air. So I think that kind
Ah.
of builds into that whole like, it's cold, you get sick when it's cold, but partly it's driven by our behaviors when it's cold, which is to stay indoors more, stay closer to other people, not get good air circulation. But then there is some evidence that, you want to keep your body at an optimal temperature. You don't want to get too hot, you don't want to get too cold for a reason. Everything, the proteins in your bodies, especially, function optimally at that basic temperature. So then you shift that too far high, too far low, it's not good for you and it can make you more vulnerable to illness.
Thank you, thank you. My mom and grandma used to call it, "Oh, you go outside and you're not properly dressed, you're gonna catch your death." Like, ooh,
Right.
that's like pretty morbid. This one was a tough one. That you lose more body heat from your head than anywhere else.
So you believe this one, right?
I do. I do. I really do.
But as someone, like, yeah, I like to debunk things, but I also like to kind of like go back to basics of it and also think like, what is the potential harm or non-harm of believing that?
Okay.
So I don't know, with you, like, does that make you wear a hat more
I
often?
wear hats in the winter, like entire winter, like
It probably
probably
looks
late
pretty
September
cool.
to May.
Yeah, so that's a myth. I don't know where that one originated, although maybe it's true in kids because it's also to do with what proportion of your body is taken up by your head. And with kids, that's a greater proportion. But yeah, it can still be sensible to wear a hat when it's cold. It's a part of your body that can be more exposed than what's under lots of layers, right? And we're trying to keep these important organs warm, the heart, the lungs, and then of course the brain.
Wow. I I you said we were not sure where that came from. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say it was a rumor started by the wool hat industry
You know what? I
to
bet you
sell more hats.
they've made so much money off that one. But I love learning the origin stories of myths. So if people
Yeah,
have those, you can't always track them down or that, you find multiple origin stories, but it can be really interesting to see where these things originate.
it can. Well, for me, it was my mom, that's for sure. And you know what? Just thinking about that, it reminds me of a chapter in your book where and I've talked to my friends about this a lot, usually after several glasses of wine. Do we inherit trauma from our parents?
Oh,
That was a fascinating chapter. Like you just want to say yes.
you do, and people believe it. And here's where, like, as a person of color, as a Muslim person, like, I have feelings about this one, okay? Because as a scientist, I can look at these papers, I can look at these epigenetic papers, and just in a nutshell, this is where researchers are studying not our genes, but kind of the chemicals and proteins around our genes,
Mhm.
epigenetics, it's called, that can impact our genes. So it's not an actual change in your DNA, but it's a change in things around your DNA. And there's all these studies, especially in Holocaust survivors, that show, oh, there's something happening around the genes, and that change is being inherited. And so the children of Holocaust survivors, or the grandchildren, they're also impacted by this trauma. There are studies from other traumas too, not just the Holocaust, and they make for these amazing headlines, right? Like, oh my
Right.
gosh, one generation can experience trauma and look how it's passed down. So the scientist in me and the medical journalist who does debunking professionally, I look at these papers, I look at these studies, and I'm like, this study should not have generated this headline. Based on
Ah.
these studies, I don't think there's robust evidence that the epigenetic changes trickle down generations. And here's why. For example, if you are the child or the grandchild of somebody who lived through the Holocaust, you likely, especially in these studies, you grew up with that person. You heard
Hmm.
stories about their experiences. So,
Right.
how are you necessarily dividing and separating that effect? And so that when I look at the studies, when I think about the way that DNA and epigenetic changes might be inherited, to me, those studies are not robust. I've written about this. The
Hmm.
epigeneticists get quite angry with me. They send me angry emails. Often, what they're saying is, well, you're right. I'm not saying it's absolutely inherited. I think there's indication that it might be, and more study is needed. I don't like the headlines that were generated from my research. So sometimes they're grouchy about that because the journalists see it and run with it and they're like, this is absolutely true. But you know what scientists are like? We're often really like couching it. Well, my study might show this, but here are 16 limitations. We need more studies, right? So that's where I think the science is. I do not think at the moment the science really robustly shows that trauma is inherited. However, as a human being, with my scientist hat off or halfway off, I can't always get it completely off, it feels like maybe there's something there. I think
Yeah.
that there's something feasible there. Like, why wouldn't that be passed down? And maybe it's not passed down through epigenetics, but maybe it's passed
Right.
down in a different way through storytelling, through the lived
Hmm.
experiences of your loved ones. And so I want more research on that. I want the epigeneticists to do better studies than the ones they're doing now, to follow
Agreed.
more people, more time, to do the better science that shows it. But right now, I don't think it's there.
Right. Right. Right now, it feels like a great dinner table argument to
Yes,
have,
and let's
so to
have it, you
speak.
know, let's have it. And I have friends who have disagree with me. They're not necessarily scientists, but they really feel that because of their own histories. And I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, that's you're allowed to have whatever assessment you
Yes.
want of the science, right? That's what makes the world interesting, sometimes frustrating, sometimes dangerous. But that's where I sit. The science to me isn't robust enough, but I want more science done.
Right. No, I really love that chapter because I wanted it and then I was like, oh, the science isn't there yet. But it did make me have that thirst for more, which is what science should do. Uh,
Absolutely,
I
absolutely.
guess.
And you know, we look for limitations in our studies and we want to continue them and find better evidence if it's there.
Yeah, you mentioned this earlier on in our conversation, and you have some serious chapters in the book that I was just it was riveting to read, and I was really impressed that you didn't shy away from this. You know, you sort of put the laundry out there, so to speak. And one of those chapters was, "Is it dangerous to be pregnant in
Oh
America?"
yeah.
Whew. I when I say I love that chapter, you know, I appreciate the work and the honesty that you put into it, and it
It's
was quite chilling,
horrible. It's
horrible.
horrible. No one should be dying because of pregnancy. I mean, that shouldn't be a reason to die, right? Not especially not in one
Not
of the most
here.
developed nations in the world. It's bad. And I was writing about that. As I said, I wrote this book over the course of 4 years. And 4 years ago, I was still living in Dallas, Texas. And I was reporting on this for the Dallas Morning News. It's bad in Texas. It's so bad in Texas that even though things are bad in the States in general, like the rest of the world is actually making gains in making pregnancy safer. In the US,
Hmm.
it's going backwards, it's getting more dangerous. But even when we do those analyses of the US and pregnant women across the US, Texas is so bad that the scientists sometimes take out Texas from the analysis because it skews all of the data.
Wow.
It's so bad. And then now I live in California, where actually it's safer for me to get pregnant here and be pregnant here than it is in Texas, because this is the one state that's really making good advances and it's going in the right direction. So there's lessons to be learned too. And I share like a kind of personalish story as well about a colleague
Hmm.
in that chapter, because this is real. This is real, and it should not be this way. And especially in Texas, the officials are really being cagey and not sharing all the data that we need in order to do the science and try and inform the policy through the science, which is really frustrating. Like, give us open access to the data. And I've written pieces, the Dallas Morning News years ago, about exactly that. But yes, it is
Yeah,
dangerous.
no, I read that. So this is totally not a myth. You know, women aren't making this up. This is the numbers are there. I was surprised at Texas, their resistance, you
Yeah,
know, and they tried to lean on, if I remember this correctly, you know, patients' rights and privacy, and you're like, strip out the names. We don't need names. We don't know.
exactly.
We don't need
There's
Tasha next door.
there's ways to de-identify and anonymize data. It was totally not about that, and them just trying to cover things up because it's a really bad situation.
Wow. And yeah, I enjoyed that chapter. And then the other one that hit incredibly close to home is did the US government infect people with syphilis and gonorrhea?
Yeah, you can't make that stuff up, right? It's awful. Really dark chapters in history and
Yes.
pretty recent history,
Oh, yeah.
pretty recent history. And the reason those chapters are in the book is because that's really trying to get to the heart of why people believe what they believe, why somebody might not trust a doctor or a nurse. And we can't ignore that. We need to atone for
Hmm.
that. And the history of medicine is bad going way back. The speculum, so many of the gynecological tools and surgeries that we do were invented by and named after men who did experiments on enslaved Black women. For example, doing surgeries on those women without their consent and without even anesthetizing them. And we still often use the names of those men in those surgeries on with those equipments. We name buildings after them. And it's like a very sordid legacy that has a trickle down effect now. With the COVID-19 vaccine, the vaccine makers and scientists are really desperate to recruit people of color to the clinical trials because you want to see how these work in everyone. And historically, people of color, we're not included in vaccine trials or in medical trials at all because there's so much reticence about being experimented on and not being carefully, ethically, taken care of during these trials because yes, it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but US government scientists have deliberately, in the worst, most horrific, obscene, grotesque ways, like infected people deliberately with sexually transmitted diseases, including scraping the skin off men's penises, and then pouring the bacteria onto the scrapes, including injecting these bacteria into the spines of people. And I don't include every, because you could read a book like Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington, and really
Yes.
this book isn't doing
Whew.
that. It's not going through
Right.
every single incident. If I had, then there'd be examples from not long ago in the US where kids with Down syndrome were experimented on, older people, older Jewish people in nursing homes. Like it's bad, and we can't just pretend that that hasn't happened. We need to have that conversation. And I'll give you one quick example
Sure.
of how it manifests. So a couple of years ago, there was a really, really bad tuberculosis outbreak in Alabama. And, the CDC and others were on it and they were trying to figure out why was TB spreading at such a high rate in the US. You don't normally see it that bad. It was really bad. And they were doing things like offering cash incentives to folks in the area, come get tested. And they were really getting frustrated in the public health world. Why aren't people coming to get their TB test? Why aren't people coming to get a chest x-ray? And I was like, all you had to do was look on Google Maps to see where this outbreak was happening in Alabama. And then you could just drop a pin and be like, it's a 1.5 hour drive from where the outbreak is happening to Tuskegee. And Tuskegee is a chapter in the book where there was this awful experiment done on black men, on sharecroppers, poor men who were lied to about having syphilis, and who, even once we knew penicillin was a cure, it wasn't given to them. They got really sick, it damaged their brain, they passed it on to their partners and their kids, right? Um, that ended, that horrible experiment went on for decades, and it only ended in the 1970s. So
Yeah.
that legacy lives on. Like, why are you even surprised that there's a TB outbreak nearby? And why are you even surprised that people are worried about the disease but still don't want to roll up their sleeve or open their
Mm-hmm.
shirt for a doctor in a white coat who works for the US government? I know I say this as someone who did work at the CDC, who did work for the central
Yes.
government. You can't pretend this stuff didn't happen, and you can't pretend that it's not having an impact now, and yet we just kind
Yes.
of want to carry on as business as usual. It's clearly not working.
It absolutely has an impact now. I like to think of myself, as I don't know, reasonably, middle class, reasonably educated woman, and all of my friends, the code word is Tuskegee. We're like, like
Yeah,
that says
yeah,
it all for us, and that is the sort of the subtext or just the slug line for all of the history behind that to why maybe we're not going to sign up for that study,
you
or
know,
we're not going to get that test,
right.
or we're going to delay a treatment, or we're going to, if we do go in, we have lots of questions and we're still suspect about the answers. It really does have an effect.
Oh yeah, and we have this whole body of evidence now, very, very recent. The studies are still coming out this year about how Black patients are ignored when it comes to their pain,
Yep.
how analgesia, pain meds are withheld. There's a study from 4 years ago of white medical students and white physicians where many of them, this is at the University of Virginia, where many of them had magical, non-scientific beliefs about Black people, believing Black people are more fertile than white people, that Black people's nerves are different, that their hearts are. This is ridiculous. So why would we expect people of color to be like, yeah, sure, sign me up for a COVID-19 vaccine, especially
Yeah,
Black
yeah, that's a
Americans,
no.
given the history, right? So, and we don't want it to stay a no. We need to build
Right.
trust, but we're doing very little. All we're doing is, please sign up. Why aren't you signing up? Oh my gosh, no one's signing up.
Right. And I must apologize. I realize I've done something that I've seen other hosts do. And for everyone watching, I apologize. I assumed a basis of knowledge that, I might have and that you might have. And then the audience is scratching their head because a question just popped up when we were talking about pregnancy. And maybe we're women, so we want to know about these things. I don't know the gender of the person asking, so I might be wrong on that as well. But they're saying, how is pregnancy dangerous in the United States? Like, why or how?
Yeah,
And
no,
so,
no,
so,
no.
so we just had a whole different conversation without letting
No.
people know what
It's
those
such a
dangers
great
might be.
question. And I hope it came from a
Yes,
man because men should be interested too. People of all genders should have an investment
they
in
should.
people not dying when they're pregnant. So, actually, when we talk about maternal mortality, we're talking about pregnancy, but also the short period after pregnancy when complications can occur. So, pregnancy, yeah, it's like a life event. It puts a stress on your body. It should not kill you. It should not kill you in America. But the ways that women are dying during or shortly after pregnancy are to do with these quite routine complications of pregnancy not being detected early on and not being managed. For example, preeclampsia, when women can get, or people who are pregnant can get high blood pressure, which can really impact the organs and damage organs. That needs to be checked. You need to have blood pressure checks through pregnancy. But if there are barriers to access to healthcare, which is one of the ways this can happen, people aren't getting their prenatal checks, they're not getting the right nutrition, they're not getting something as basic as their blood pressure checks, then they're dying of preeclampsia. That's one example, and the book goes into some more examples as well. But that's one of the ways. The story that I mention in the book is about a woman who dies soon after birth. So she gives birth to a healthy child. She does not feel well after pregnancy. And this is a pretty common scenario in that she's a Black woman working at the
Mhm.
CDC. So a highly, highly educated Black woman, a lieutenant in the US Public Health Service. She, in fact, herself studies disparities in healthcare, and she was ignored by her doctors. It's kind of like, you're fine, go home. You've come back again, go home.
Right.
And then she died.
Yeah.
And that's not uncommon.
So I want to thank the person who asked that question and that popped up for me, and I saw it, just so that we people are really understanding and getting that idea,
And
and
obviously, it's
and
way
I,
more. We could do a whole hour, talking just about that. But I also feel
just about that.
Why is it worse in Texas? It for a bunch
Well,
of
yeah, that
reasons.
actually is a question. Why is it
Yeah,
worse in
I just saw
Texas?
that. Why is it better in California? So oftentimes it's to do with making sure that people have access to prenatal care, that they're getting those basic checks through pregnancy, and that is not being done on a wide scale. There are too many people in Texas that are being missed, that are not getting the right care during pregnancy when you wanted to take, because those things can happen, but they can be managed and they should be managed. And what's happening is women aren't having those really scary, life-threatening things detected early on when they could be managed, and instead they're dying. Young women.
Unnecessarily, yes. So Seema, thank you so much. I can't believe that the time is really flying, and so I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the medical myths around COVID-19,
What's that?
SARS-CoV-2,
I
Miss
don't know what
Rona,
that
whatever we're
is.
calling her. There's lots of names. There's real names and nicknames, but we all know we're talking about the virus. There are some myths out there, and some of them I didn't know. This one passed me by, and it goes back to the water. Will sipping water every 15 minutes flush out the virus because water is so good for us? No.
No, but water is good for you, so do sip it. Don't overdo
Yes.
it. Have the right
Right.
amount. Um, in some way, like being well nourished, being not stressed out. I say this under an orange sky because I live in the Bay Area where there's
Right.
wildfires. I'm doing yoga every day to try and not get stressed out because all of those things give you a sense of well-being, like being well hydrated, being well nourished, exercising, doing yoga, meditation. That is good for you. I believe that can make you resilient towards other illnesses because you're trying to like keep your immune system strong. Can I pinpoint any one thing, like one supplement, one herb, one amount of water that will boost? People love to talk about boosting the immune system. Magically, no. And so sipping water, especially if you're already infected, it's not going to flush out the virus, but it will keep you hydrated, keep your systems functioning well so that hopefully, you can overcome the infection. My concern with all of these kinds of myths is that I never want people to be given a false sense of security, like, oh, I found out I'm positive for the infection, but I'm just going to drink my water. You know what I mean? Like, I always worry that people,
Mm.
because there are folks out there spreading so much stuff, either to cause chaos and confuse people or because they're trying to peddle a particular product. They're trying to sell something. And sometimes those things aren't necessarily harmful. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not in themselves. But I think what can be harmful is someone thinking, I'm going to use this gargle. It says it's a miracle that will kill COVID. So therefore, I don't need to wear a face mask, right? And I just worry about people kind of falling prey because we're scared, we're anxious. I think that does make us more vulnerable to just being like, I don't know
Yes.
what to believe. I'll believe this.
Right. Yeah. No, some of them were I found really surprising, like eating garlic will protect you.
Could be
Yeah,
bad.
no, I think that does more for your social distancing, quite frankly.
I love garlic, so I don't care. I'll eat as much as I want.
Do you
And again,
really?
part of a balanced diet is good for you, right? But yeah, no, it's not going to protect you from infection with SARS-CoV-2.
Wow. I thank you so much. There's so many good questions here. You know what I was surprised about was there are a lot of, I guess, false myths or beliefs that seem to surround heat. Like people thinking, hot
Hmm.
water, the blow dryer in the face, which shocked me. Hot
Yeah.
weather, like we have this thing
I
that
mean,
heat's gonna fix it.
that one about the hot weather though, because I think Trump said that as well. But
Hmm.
folks were saying that at the time when there were like outbreaks in Singapore and places where it was really hot at the time and really humid. I'm like, okay, I know we're in the States and it was spring at the time and it wasn't necessarily warm in many parts of the US then. But you're like, but just look at where it is spreading in other countries and it's like 95 degrees and really high heat. Clearly, it's not. And of course, viruses do often have seasonalities, right? We have a flu season,
Yes.
we have an RSV season, but especially with a new virus, it doesn't often establish seasonality the first time around. And
Oh,
so there was no guarantee that it will miraculously disappear in April. I mean, that didn't
right,
happen.
right. I definitely want to make sure I get some of the questions in from folks who are kind enough to put them in the Q&A. And this one is from Rich Crank. He wanted to know how, and mind you, this is where I should have my glasses on, so I'm like looking into the screen. But how does the novel coronavirus myths and disinformation and
Oh.
other BS compare and contrast with the myths and disinformation in the early years of the HIV/AIDS
Such a
crisis?
good question, Rich. Thank you for asking that. I think there are loads of parallels. And my first book, The Impatient Dr. Langer, is all about HIV/AIDS and the origin of HIV/AIDS. It's about one particular physician, so it tells it through his life story. He was my mentor, and he was this amazing Dutch HIV scientist working on a cure for HIV, and then he got killed on the Malaysia Airlines flight MH17, if you remember that happening when it got shot down over the Ukraine 6 years ago. Gosh, it was that year when there were two Malaysia airline planes, one that went missing and one that got shot down. So I tell the story of his life in that book. His kind of life's work was to end the HIV pandemic. But in writing that book, I kind of went back to his origin story and then the origins of HIV. And I was thinking about that this recently as well, that when you have an unknown and when you have a scary unknown, a new pathogen that's infecting people, it's spreading widely and it's killing people, we as humans, we want to fill in the knowledge gaps, even when we don't have the data yet, because good science takes time. And so we often fill that with stories. And often those stories demonize certain sectors of society as a way of making other people feel okay. And so I see many parallels between COVID-19 and HIV. For example, early on, before HIV/AIDS had a name, because we didn't know what the heck it was, one of the names it was called was the four H's. And the four H's stood for homosexuals, Haitians, heroin users, and the homeless. And so you think about with COVID-19, I mean, there were kids being bullied early on because they were Chinese. There were ER doctors in the
Yes.
US being spat at because they were Asian. And people were like, I don't want to get cared by you because you're carrying the China disease or the Wuhan disease. So I
Right.
see so many similarities then. And again, maybe not exactly the same myths about treatments, but the same idea, right? That there are, I've written this sentence in that New York Times op-ed from 2 weeks ago. I've written the same sentence in my first book, which is for every epidemic, there are snake oil salesmen trying to peddle a cure because we are
Yeah.
freaking out, which is natural. And then there are people who are like, oh, I can make a quick buck off of this fear. And so, as with HIV, as with COVID-19, you see those myths circulating, especially about who's vulnerable, who's spreading the disease, and you see those
Right.
same kind of fake cures being peddled. And that first book goes into some, oh my God, the detail about South Africa, where the Minister of Health in South Africa was peddling myths to the point that she earned herself the nickname, she was a medical doctor, she earned herself the nickname Dr. Beetroot. Because even when amazing HIV meds became available, she was like, do not take them. They are poison. You need to drink beetroot juice and you need to eat potato, right? I mean, I could go on and on because there's so many of those myths were like killing people. There were like industrial solvents being packaged as cures for HIV. And I think about that now with some folks on the internet selling miracle gargles, bottles of this, supplements of that. They don't, at best, they don't work. At worst, they give you a false sense of security, so you drop down your guard and you could get infected. Or even worse, they are so harmful. And in that chapter in the book about autism, same thing, because we still have unanswered questions about autism. Um, we're still trying to understand best treatments. In the meantime, you have this one thing called literally the miracle cure that people give to kids with autism. It's bleach. It's household bleach. And kids have gotten so sick from it. And I go into detail in that chapter, but you're like, yeah, I don't know. So yeah, loads of
Oh,
similarities, not just between those epidemics, but even now with things like autism, where people are like, nothing's
wow.
working, give me something.
Yeah. This leads to another question, but I think we already know the answer. Peter Boyer wanted to know, how do celebrities avoid legal trouble when they offer medical advice, etc.? We're speaking about Goop and Gwyneth Paltrow, but they don't. She got sued. She's been sued, but it
They're
hasn't put a
like
dent in the empire,
They're like Teflon
unfortunately.
Dons when it comes to these lawsuits. I mean, in fact, they make so much money off like with Gwyneth Paltrow, it's the jade eggs that you're supposed to put up your vagina, which don't do anything and actually could cause an infection.
Yep.
I think they avoid it by just disclaimers and by like, this is not, you know, your typical, this is not medical advice. You must, I think that's how folks get away with it. In fact, you know what? When I was in journalism school, the first ever front page story I ever did, this was must have been 2014, was about dietary supplements and this outbreak of hepatitis that was killing
Right.
people in 2014 around the States and in Hawaii. It killed this young mother of five. It killed loads of people. It killed people in the army because everyone was trying to get fit. I think it was called Oxy Elite. I have to look it up again, the name. My frustration about writing that story was like, oh my God, why can't the FDA just pull this off the shelves? And in
Right.
fact, eventually they did, but they sent these letters. I hate that company. Is it GNC?
GNC,
The
yes.
supplement company, I will never step foot in them because during the course of reporting that story, the parents of these kids in the army who died from that supplement would go into the stores and be like, please pull this supplement. It killed my kid. And they would still keep it on the shelf. And in a nutshell, the reason I'm sharing this story is because by the end of reporting that, I was like, you're kind of on your own when it comes to dietary supplements. And celebrities can push what they want, entrepreneurs can push what they want. And I remember at the time I was teaching public health at University of Texas, and I had written that story, and I said to my students, you know what, like if you ever want to make a quick million, just sell a dietary supplement. I was like, I probably shouldn't have said that out loud, but like I was so frustrated. Like there was, when it comes to supplements, because they're not a food and they're not a
Right.
medicine, they fall into this big black hole of very little regulation. And people, celebs, as the question's asking about, or just others trying to make money, they just exploit that black hole.
Wow. Well, I do want to make a quick million, by the way.
Don't do it like that.
But I would like to do it honestly. I really
And not
would.
without giving anyone hepatitis.
Exactly, exactly. Foolish me. Foolish
You don't
me.
want that karma.
I don't. I don't. I don't want an asterisk by my name in the book, so to speak. I believe I asked you this before, just when we were sort of behind the scenes, but I'll ask it so it's out here. What are the most common complications reported so far with the experimental vaccine? Because that's in the
Yeah,
news
so
right now
I've been
heavily.
tracking, I've been tracking this for a few months because obviously it's not like the trials just started. There's been phase
Right.
one trials starting back in April. I think the commonest side effects are the ones that you would expect, which are people having a sore arm, people getting headaches or feeling feverish and having body pains. And I say you'd expect that because you might feel that way after you get the flu shot or the shingle shot, because a good vaccine is trying to stimulate your immune system, so you will feel those
Right.
things. Ideally, it's really mild and it's really transient, right? But that's what we've been seeing. Of course, with the Moderna vaccine, there was the man who spiked a high temperature of 103. And I'm sure I'm getting asked this question, especially now because it was yesterday. I mean, the days are blurring, but I think it was yesterday that we got that news that the Oxford University AstraZeneca trials been temporarily halted because one person wound up in hospital. We now know that she's a woman who had like a swelling of her spinal cord. And actually, what we learned was that they had halted the trial previously in July as well, because that time a man had developed a neurologic complication. I think he had multiple sclerosis that was not connected to the vaccine, but still, you stop the vaccine trial for a while. I know people are quite disappointed or scared by this news of the trial being halted, and I get it. To me, it's like the checks and balances are in place. This is pretty standard. We are human, so we can get sick at any given time during the trial. It may not be that we're getting sick from the vaccine, it could be something else, but you have your protocol, you stop the trial just in case it is the vaccine. So for me, it was more like, oh, I wish nothing bad had happened because like we just need the trial to continue and do really well. But this is pretty standard. This happens. It shows that the safety measures are in place.
We have a lot of questions here. This one, there's a through line to all of these that we've done, and that through line is that people have an honest desire to reach out and talk to people and connect with people who believe something differently from them. And this question is in that vein. And it's Carl Huggins. Thank you, Carl, for your question. What is the best way to interact with parents who are grasping at straws for cures for their children?
Yeah. And I guess this is cures of COVID, right? Not
I guess
necessarily autism or in general.
he did not specify. He did not specify. I
Yeah.
know that I've heard you say that what you wouldn't do is dismiss them out of hand. you
Yeah.
know, you want to listen to them
And I
and
was
work with them where they are.
And I was joking about this on Twitter yesterday because in my professional life, I teach scientists and especially healthcare professionals how to effectively communicate and engage with somebody who doesn't hold the same beliefs as you, who doesn't want to vaccinate their kid, right? And so when I teach this professionally, it's a long class. It takes a long time to get through this, but in a nutshell, I'll tell you facts alone are not sufficient to change a person's mind. You need to listen, you need to learn where they're coming from, what's the context to them, for example, not wanting to vaccinate their kid. I will say the reason I tweeted a joke about this yesterday was everything that I teach, I did not preach yesterday in the family group chat because I just like lost my ish with one of my cousins who was like sharing like some really dumb articles from April. And I was like, about Sweden. And I was just like, I can't take it. So I did all the things you're not meant to do. I got annoyed. I was dismissive. I kind of shut down the conversation. You don't do those things. You're human. Like me, you're allowed to do that sometimes because you are not a robot. But we do have tools for effectively communicating where there's a polarized environment and a conversation where two people are opposites. When I train this, I all because especially in science and medicine, we feel very like happy with ourselves that, but I have the evidence, I have the facts. Yeah, pouring facts onto a polarized conversation is like pouring kerosene onto a fire. There's actually decades of evidence that shows it doesn't work. So I don't know why we keep doing that. But you're wrong. But the studies show it doesn't work. I can't condense my 6 to 12 hour training into like a minute, but it definitely
No,
does
no.
start with the whole you have to listen first. Um, you have to understand the context of why someone believes what they believe. You interview 10 people who don't vaccinate themselves or their kids, they might give you 10 quite different reasons for not vaccinating. So then, how dare you, as a healthcare professional, have one message for everyone? It doesn't work that way.
Mm. Ugh, this sounds like it takes time
It does. It
to.
does.
And this goes to Lynn Portnoy's question, and she wanted to know why we've given great examples of myths, but why do we keep falling for it?
Yeah. Um, I think we fall for them because as humans, we need certainty and we need answers. So on the one hand, we're trying to fill in those gaps that I was talking about, where a new virus has emerged. We're still trying to figure out transmission dynamics, who's susceptible, while the scientists are going away doing their due diligence and doing the studies that take time. You have people that come in to fill those gaps, often with nonsense, often with conspiracy theories that have a few grains of truth and then lots of other things. So I think we fall for myths because we're human, we're looking for that certainty, that complete story. I think we also sometimes fall for myths because they're good. They're like interesting, they're memorable. There was this study that came out 2 years ago from MIT that found that false news travels farther and faster than the truth. And which is
Mm-hmm.
depressing and interesting. But what's really interesting to me is when you look at why. Why does something false travel faster and farther than the truth? And it's generally because the falsehood is packaged as really new, novel, sensationalist, memorable, exciting, a bit like what out there. You're more likely to hit share on that than on 4 bullet points that are the facts about something. This is such a good question. It's exactly what I study. So I could talk about this for hours because I think we are such complex people. And I do get into this in the book. But I think that's partly why. And sometimes the myths are really well done and they're really believable and they have a little grain of truth that makes the rest of the stuff around it also seem believable. And I start the book with an introduction that's about me and my family and how I was raised as a conspiracy theorist. And the reason and I won't go into all of that, but there's a reason that we are vulnerable to conspiracy theories. And even the people that you think would be resilient are not always,
Yeah.
not always.
Agreed. Our former speakers, our prior speakers have made it very clear that, you know, yeah, there might be, say there are 10 myths, and you're like, oh, I don't believe in that nine of them, but that one, there's
You
always
know?
one that
You know?
gets you.
Yeah.
This brings me, you know, as we begin to wrap up here, you know, there's a lot of myths, there's a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot to keep up on and keep track of. But are there some quick tips? And you kind of almost already did it. You
Yeah.
in some quick tips for spotting misinformation. so
Yeah,
that we
so
can sort of protect ourselves or inoculate ourselves.
definitely. And speaking of inoculation, I'll get to that too. Some of the red flags to look out for is when something seems too good to be true. A vaccine's been found. This is definitely a cure. You should get this. When things are spoken with extreme certainty, because we live in a world that always has a bit of uncertainty. Scientists will always kind of annoyingly be like, well, the study found this, but whereas someone who's kind of trying to sell you a fake cure is like, no, this works 100% of the time. So watch out for things that sound too good to be true. Watch out for people that speak with complete certainty. What else do I say? Do your due diligence. We're
Hmm.
living in a time where so much is spreading. It's very tempting to just hit send, like my cousin did in the group chat yesterday. Take a minute to just look at the source. He should have seen that was a Daily Mail. Like it was not good reporting and it was not a good analysis of the study. Do your due diligence before you share things because you don't want to be part of the problem. And I just really want to quickly add to this a response to Vaughan Reese's question, which is about some people frowning on the use of the term debunking. The last
Yes.
chapter in the book is about this because I think it's so interesting and because there's a debate, about what should we call it. The last chapter in the book is called Does Debunking a Myth Help It Spread? Because some people
Yes.
believe that just by repeating it, you're giving a myth a platform and more oxygen. There's evidence that that's true, that debunking a myth does help it spread. And then there's evidence that shows actually it's useful to debunk it and give people some ideas as to why it might be false and that could protect them. We don't have any time because we're out of time, but you said
Yes.
inoculate. There's a way to immunize yourself and others against rumors, and it's in the book, and I'm so fascinated by that.
Right. I believe there was a line in that chapter that really got me, that said, "Not acknowledging it doesn't make it go away."
You know, I wish, I wish that worked. I wish I would ignore so much stuff if I could do that.
I I,
Unfortunately, no.
I would ignore the '90s. That wasn't necessarily my best decade.
Oh,
But thank you, Seema, so much. Once again, her book is coming out in January. You guys can pre-order it, and it's Viral BS, Medical Myths, and Why We Fall for Them. So you can get some more of the in-depth answers and information that we were talking about tonight. And if you missed any of this talk, the recording will be available on Skeptical Inquirer's website tomorrow, which is, you can find that at skepticalinquirer.org. And our next talks in the series will be on September 24th. Nathan Lentz will be talking about evolution only breaks things, the science denial at the heart of intelligent design. And on October 8th, the one and only Sasha Sagan will be with us, talking about rituals for non-believers. So I thank Skeptical Inquirer and the tech team, which is the amazing Mark, for making us look good tonight. And again, thank you, Seema, for sharing your passion and your expertise with us. And again, I am your host, Leighann Lord, and you can find me at veryfunnylady.com. And until then, I look forward to seeing almost all of you back here on September 24th. Thank you. Thank you, Seema.
thank you, Leanne. Thanks, everyone. Take care.